So thank you all for joining us today. I am Sana Lalani, and I'm a capacity and education building intern at Health HIV. Before we begin the training today, which is hosted by Whitman-Walker, I'll just really quickly run through and introduce Health HIV. Can I go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this program is funded wholly or in part by the government of District of Columbia, DC Health, HIV/AIDS, Hepatitis, STD, and TB Administration, HASTA. Next slide, please. So DC Engage is one of our programs, and the program objectives are listed here. Some of them are expanding the Washington, DC public health workforce capacity, to successfully implement harm reduction and opioid overdose reduction program models, sustain comprehensive harm reduction services for people who use drugs, increase community partners, access to culturally and linguistically appropriate services, and the capacity to link and referral, increase access to evidence-based, promising harm reduction and risk reduction, increase the availability and utilization for intensive tailored capacity building, and build infrastructure systems and model integration and sustainability. Next slide, please. For DC Engage, the goal and the purpose is to strengthen the capacity of aspiring or established community-based organizations and peer-led coalitions to integrate culturally and linguistically appropriate evidence-based and promising practice models to prevent opioid overdoses, enhance access to prevention and treatment, and to reduce deaths associated with opioid use. Next slide, please. And another part of HASTA is the Effi Training Institute. And here are just different components of it. So they work with individual consultation, group level training, e-learning modules, webinars, podcasts, boot camps, community forums, and health and wellness fair. And then here is the website if anyone is interested in learning more. Next slide, please. And then another part of it is the Opioid Learning Institute, which is e-learning for healthcare professionals on safe and effective opioid practices. It's online, self-paced curriculum and resources. There are 25 free accredited learning courses, case reviews, and webinars. Their clinical decisions support to immediately apply to practice. Next slide, please. And then, so Health HIV has these 4 core capabilities: education and training, capacity building, health services, research and evaluation, and advocacy. And we have a diverse staff of professionals working with HIV, HCV, and LGBTQAI+, and substance use prevention care, behavioral health, cultural competence, harm reduction, and more. And it is particularly within underserved communities. So yes, thank you for letting me quickly introduce Health HIV. I will be passing it on to Whitman-Walker to begin their training. At the end of the presentation, there will be an evaluation survey link, which I will send really quick. So thank you so much, everyone.
Well, yeah, thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for having us. I am very excited to be able to participate with this and help teach you all about the name change process in DC. My name is Elizabeth Cunolini, and I'm one of the staff attorneys with Whitman-Walker Health Legal Services. I lead our name and gender change program altogether, and I am very happy to be joined by 2 of my fantastic colleagues, Jess and Isaiah, and I will turn it over to them to introduce themselves real quick.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for part 2 of this training with us. My name is Jess Davis-Ritchie. I use they, them pronouns, staff attorney at Whitman-Walker, and I'm also a mentoring attorney in our name and gender change practice. And I'll pass to Isaiah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Isaiah Levinson. I use they, them pronouns. I am a paralegal with the Whitman-Walker Legal Services practice. And I just want to reflect my colleagues and say thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're so excited.
So today, what we have on the agenda for you is to begin with an overview of the DC name change process and kind of go through the step-by-step of what it looks like to start the process and go from start to finish. We'll talk about what kind of the supporting documentation you are going to need when going through the name change process. We'll also spend some time talking about some special considerations that you'll want to think about when you're advising your clients on how to do this. And we'll end by talking about what kind of resources are available, how to support clients, and then what are all the next steps that a person is going to have to look forward to, and what are some of the Whitman-Walker services that we have available, and how else we might be able to help folks out.
So just to get started today, we wanted to get a feel of who we have in our audience today. So we just wanted to start by asking, in what role are you helping people with name changes and updating their identity documents? Are you a caseworker or a social worker? Are you a community advocate? Are you an attorney or another legal services professional? Yeah, what role do you take in helping people with these changes? If you can put in the chat, we can have some more. Great. So I see Sean has said a therapist. Kimberly has said a case manager. We've got another case manager, therapist, case manager, healthcare. Great. So it's great to see this reflection: case manager, psychologist, court-appointed special advocate for children in foster care, social worker, medical student. Great. So we have a kind of a varied background of people in our audience today. Non-medical case manager. Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate that. Yeah, and then a pediatrician as well. Great. So we've got a lot of case managers, social workers, people working in medical capacities as well. That's great to know. HIV PrEP educator. Great. And then if we could go to the next slide real quick. We also wanted to ask, what issues do you encounter in your work related to name changes and accessing and or updating identity documents? If you could also let us know in the chat what experience you've had with this, what issues you've run into with people with these various either mismatching identification not matching the name that people use, etc. If anyone has experiences. Yeah, someone has said associated costs. Thank you, Diana. We have judges and attorneys not supportive of they, them language in reports to address youth, from Dawn. Yeah, definitely people using pronouns of people that they want. Associated costs, which we will speak on a bit. Yeah, difficulties with insurance for paying for claims with non-matching names or incorrect gender for services rendered. Yeah, definitely something that people run into, and we've seen as well. Yeah. Well, thank you all for sharing. All other government agencies do not observe preferred identity. Yeah, thank you all for sharing.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. And we'll also have time at the end reserved for Q&A. So I'll just get into the big picture of the name and gender change process. Everything starts with what I call the golden ticket, the court order. So the client will petition their local court in DC, that's DC Superior Court. It's typically a civil division or a family division, but in DC it's a civil actions branch. The client will petition DC court, and we'll talk more about what that actually looks like and the details of that process. But ultimately, a judge decides to legally change their name. They'll receive a court order of that name change, and that legally at that point is their new name. However, no one knows that until the client begins to update all of their records and documents. And so that can be done as well as updating the gender marker. Now, gender marker, you do not need to petition a court for the most part. There'll be one caveat for that. But typically, gender marker updates are done administratively. Usually there's some form that can be signed by a doctor, but in the DMV, at the Department of Motor Vehicles in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, all of those agencies allow folks to self-attest to gender. So it's either a form or it's, in Maryland, it's a box on a screen that you just say what you are. And so that, as well as now the US Passport Agency allows for self-attestation of gender. And so that also makes those processes easier. However, with Social Security and on many birth certificates, at least in the DMV area, there still will need to be a form signed by a doctor, but someone is able to go to the DMV and get an ID with the gender marker of their choice. And X gender marker if they identify as non-binary or choose to not have either a male or female indicator. And then once the client gets back all that updated identity documentation, then they proceed with updating all of the rest of their records. So we'll get into that in more detail, and we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So an overview of the DC name change process itself. So just starting with that golden ticket court order, that's the proof you need to change your name on all of your identity documents and accounts. So the first thing that you'll need to do is gather the documentation required for the name change. So the name change itself, petition is an application form that's available on the website, and we'll have a link to that later. So you're going to fill that out completely. It does ask, and we'll talk in more detail about that, the specifics of the application itself, but you'll also need to gather identity documents and proof of DC residency in order to file. And so once you gather those documents, you complete the name change application, you'll file with DC Superior Court. After that, after you file, the court will send you a notice of your name change hearing. And there is a 10-day requirement after that notice is received to notify any creditors that were listed in the application. So there is one notice requirement, but it's in particular to notifying creditors of the name change, which is an attempt to prevent fraud. And then once that's all done, you'll submit the evidence to the court, and then you'll attend your final hearing via WebEx. It can be by call-in, telephone, it can be a video if you would like, but it doesn't have to be. It's very short and sweet. It's not very complicated. Judge just confirms what you want, what you want your name to be, and it's granted fairly quickly. And the court will send instructions on how to dial into the hearing when they give you the notice of the hearing date. After that, luckily you get the name change court order in the mail, and then you proceed to update identity documents and personal records.
So now we're talking about all these different things, sending notice, filling out applications and gathering documents, final hearings. It sounds like a lot, but we're going to break it down into a very step-by-step process to really make it as simple as possible. I have gone through the name change process twice myself in DC, and I can promise it is not as bad as it sounds or as it looks. And this is something that people can and often do navigate on their own, and occasionally with some guidance from attorneys or other legal service providers. But as Jess noted, it all starts off with filing the application for a change of name. And so the application is available on the court's website, and here's the link. We will also be sending out a copy of the slides after the presentation, so you'll also have access to the information. But there are a couple of important points to start off with when just going through the application itself. Currently, the court, before the pandemic, folks used to file in person and file everything at once. They would get scheduled for their hearing that very day. They would come back 5 weeks later and attend their hearing, and they'd walk out with their court order. And of course, that has changed a little bit with the emergence of COVID-19. So now the court does most of its communication with folks remotely. And one thing that has necessitated is including email addresses when you are filling out the application. But there's not actually a specific line where a person can enter their email address. So we strongly recommend that folks include that just in the same field where they write their phone number. So you write the phone number and then also include the email address. And so that way, that's just makes it that way it's doing our best to ensure that the court can actually get in contact with folks. Some special considerations when you are actually going through the form that you will want to think about, though, are some of what we have listed. The first one is minors. For minors, it does get a little bit more complicated because you have to use a different form. You actually, for minors, file in a different part of DC Superior Court. And a little quirk with that is that minors file in the family division, whereas most folks file with judge and chambers. but the family division also hears cases for people age 18, 19, or 20. And so those people will also use the minor form and file with the family division, even though they're not actually minors. Other things to be aware of are previous name changes, because people will need to include proof of that name change, whether it's been through marriage, divorce, or a previous court-ordered name change. We had mentioned notice requirements, and then that also plays an important part, because folks need to let the court know about any sort of open administrative, civil, or criminal cases. If they have any felony convictions, those usually trigger notification requirements to interested parties, such as like if you are involved in a court case, you are going to need to notify the court and any opposing parties that you're changing your name. We also want to highlight any need for language assistance. If a person does need language assistance or interpretation from the court is legally obligated to provide that service, but they need to know that it is required. And so we suggest just including a note about that in the same line where you're noting the person's phone and email address. The last somewhat related thing that folks really should be mindful of is immigration status. Even for people who are full citizens, if they're foreign born, we still recommend that folks do a name change screening with an immigration attorney who is familiar with these issues. One of the first reasons that we have highlighted on the slide is that we have those notification requirements, which means if somebody has an application pending with immigration, they'll need to notify immigration. But more than that, immigration status can intersect with name changes in a couple of really interesting ways. Name changes for trans folks that actually can help create a moment of opportunity to apply for immigration relief. One of the biggest things we see in our practice with asylum seekers, trans folks from the Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. In asylum law, if you're not familiar, you have to apply within a year of entering the United States. And if you don't apply within a year, you have to demonstrate exceptions to that. And one of those is changed circumstances. There's a lot more that goes into it, but a name change and steps in gender transition can create that changed circumstance that creates a window of eligibility for a person to apply for asylum, but they have to do it pretty quickly. And so that's just one really big example of a person who might not otherwise have avenue for immigration relief, but that could be something that intersects with the name change. And it's really important for non-citizens to really understand their full picture and their individual considerations. But once you start off with that and work with the person to fill out the forms and answer all the questions, the next part is going to be gathering all of those supporting documents. In DC, in order to file, you need to include, when you file, a proof of DC residency. And so that can be any number of things, including leases or rental agreements, utility or phone bills, government issued mail, pay statements. There isn't any one exhaustive list. It's kind of like the Real ID DMV requirements. Anything that they list as proof of identity or proof of residency could probably be used for the court. For folks who might have issues proving residency, you can get very creative about how to do that, whether it's playing around with updating addresses on like utility statements or bank accounts to generate mail with the correct address. If a person has or is living with a friend or something or at a shelter, they can actually get an affidavit from social workers or co-residents to certify their residency. So there are some workarounds if people might have issues establishing that. Another piece of documentation that folks need is going to be a valid photo ID. Photocopies are sufficient currently with the health pandemic and submitting things either remotely or electronically. Other required document is going to be a birth certificate for folks. And one big note about that specifically for foreign-born individuals is that if it's in another language, you will need to include a certified translation, not just a translation, but also one that includes a certification by the translator that it is true and accurate to the best of that person's ability. And if you do not have examples of that, then you can reach out to us and we can provide you those sample documents. Another document that you may want to file for along with a name change is going to be a fee waiver. In DC, the filing fee for a name change application is $60. There are also additional fees for related documents, such as a motion to seal to keep your court records out of public view. The fee for that would be $20, but all of those fees can be waived with a waiver. And DC actually is very generous with their fee waivers. And they also make it so that folks who receive certain means tested benefits, such as Medicaid or DC Alliance, automatically qualify for it. So all they have to do is check the box that says they received that benefit, include a copy of their Medicaid ID card, and boom, they automatically qualify for a fee waiver. The last bit of required documentation that folks should be putting together when they're filling out their application and going through the process is just a list of those creditors and interested parties, because you will need to provide notice to them. What those folks can look like are either credit card or utility companies. If a person is past due and has an outstanding balance, if someone has a mortgage, student loans, or any other kind of lenders, car loans, for example, those or any personal loans, those also need to be noted. Depending on a person's circumstances, you can have law enforcement or other government agencies. But if you're not sure, a good way to help folks or figure this out is to just get a free credit report. And this is a really good place where social workers or caseworkers and other advocates can help folks with just actually putting together that list of information in the first place.
Okay, so moving on to filing. So you've taken the time, you've gotten your certified translation of a birth certificate, or you've gotten that proof of residency, you've gathered up everything, the application's complete. So now you're ready to file the application with DC Superior Court. You will take all your completed name change application, supporting documents, and the $60 filing fee or the fee waiver. The link is here and you all will receive the slides, but this is where the fee waiver form is located online. The DC court has it available. And for trans and gender non-conforming folks that are changing their name, Whitman-Walker administers trans law financial assistance. And Trans Law is Trans Legal Advocates of Washington. It's a group, it's a volunteer-led organization that fundraises to provide financial assistance in the DMV, as we have the most trans people per capita in the US, to remove the barriers that come with updating your name and all of the documents because of the costs. So we receive a very generous grant from them, and we administer the grant to trans folks who are updating their identity documents. So if those options don't work and the client is trans or gender non-conforming, gender expansive, they can reach out to us and we can assist further with financial assistance through Trans Law. An additional thing you may want to consider filing, it is optional, it's not required, but it's strongly recommended for folks who have a concern of harm by having their name change available online. Part of what creates that issue, particularly for trans and gender non-conforming individuals, is that DC has an online court case search system. And you can put in the person's birth name or their new legal name, and the case will come up. And unfortunately, they're supposed to be redacting personally identifying information in these filings, even if they are public record, but that doesn't always happen all the way or correctly or at all sometimes, unfortunately. So that could mean someone's email address, phone number ends up on the internet. So if that's something that the person that you're working with is concerned about, reach out to the clerks to ask about how that process would work and completing a motion to seal. But to note, name change for people under the age of 18 are not accessible online anyway. So court cases for minors are not available online, but other adult civil action cases are available. And we actually have the site there where court cases are available online. Okay, we can go to the next one. Okay, and so that's all the things you might want to consider to file. You're going to need that fee waiver somehow, so you want to have a plan for that. And if you want to do the motion to seal, so then you've got your everything ready to file. So how do you go about filing? So as Liz mentioned, the process at DC Superior Court has changed and is continuing to evolve as they transition from completely remote back to a hybrid model, back to in person. So things are still in flux, but since the pandemic has started, or since they've created this option, there is a single party pro se filing option through what's called Case File Express. That's the court's e-filing system. It is the court's preferred method of filing because it gets them the documents easier. And when people are remote, they can still work on them. Case File Express is actually a very cumbersome and counterintuitive website and system. We really recommend watching the tutorial videos. There's a link in the slides, but they have several actually, which is really helpful. But we definitely recommend watching the tutorial videos on how to set up an account to use it, which each individual client will, to submit their documents, and then how to go about submitting the documents. Another option, if that's not working because it's cumbersome, you can always mail in the application and we have the address there. That's DC Superior Court, and that's also the room where you can file in person. The court is open to the public again, so you can also go and file it with the clerks in person in room 5000 at Civil Actions Branch. One more thing, if you're filing through Case File Express, if you are able to e-file and your client is eligible for a fee waiver and receives one of those means tested benefits, you actually need to email the filing to the clerk so that they can process the fee waiver, because how the fee waiver works online is it's actually sort of like a discount code. And so what that means is you'll give everything to the clerk at that civil e-filings at dcsc.gov. And then the clerk will, process the fee waiver. You'll then receive the coupon code, and then you'll use that coupon code when you're asked to pay when you're filing through the e-filing system. And so, just a note on that, if you're wondering how to access fee waiver through the process.
Some of our general tips throughout the filing process is just continuously following up with the court. As Justin was touched on, their DC Superior Court has been experiencing some delays during the public health emergency, and things have been kind of up in the air a little bit. So we recommend that the client calls the court every 2 weeks or so to make sure that the case. Let me try putting on some headphones. My apologies.
So we recommend that people follow up with the court every 2 weeks or so to make sure that the case gets through each of these following steps. We'll cover these shortly, but these include getting assigned a case number, the court sending the notice of final hearing, and then the client then sending those to the creditors, and then the court receiving the proof of notification of service by mail. So just following up after each of those things or before each of those things to make sure that each of those things happens in a somewhat timely fashion. Yeah, and then to follow up with the court, you can call for fee waiver questions, the Civil Actions Division, which the number is listed there. But for all other questions for people who are above the age of 20, who are filing in Judge in Chambers, you can contact Judge in Chambers at that JIC office at dcsc.gov email, or you can also call them. And then for people who are under 21, calling the Family Division to continuously follow up. And then just making sure that the court is aware of any language access and interpretation needs. It'll be noted, as Liz said, on the application, but it's always a good idea to continuously follow up and make sure that they have that information so that they can be prepared at the time of hearing and have language access prepared for people who need it.
So once you have everything filed and you're just kind of waiting around, eventually you should be receiving the order and notice of final hearing, what we've been talking about as the scheduling order. Now, you are supposed to receive it via email if you include an email on that line. And when you get that, it sets the time and date for the final hearing, where you are going to show up to court virtually to just have a very brief hearing with the judge. The document that you'll receive will provide you with the instructions on how to actually go about joining, and the court has that information available online as well. But most importantly, receiving the scheduling order starts that 10-day clock to notify interested parties if you have any interested parties to notify. As far as how to do that, it's actually pretty straightforward. You will have a copy of the scheduling order itself, and then you have a copy of your application. You just send those two things together by certified mail to each creditor that you listed when you initially filed your application. You want to be sending it to like the corporate headquarters. You can usually find those addresses online. You don't have to like scour the internet for the correct address to send it to. The person just needs to be making like their best effort to actually notify the appropriate agency or entity. It's important that folks do not deliver the notice in person, but folks instead need to keep the USPS receipt with the tracking numbers to later give to the court. Now, there are, unfortunately, we have seen clients encountering some issues with receiving the scheduling order in a timely fashion. We had, I've seen at least a couple of people now who both filed online by the Case File Express system, but didn't receive any kind of electronic notification that they were scheduled for a hearing. In one case, the client did not receive the scheduling order until well beyond the 10-day period had passed, but it was before the hearing. And in that case, the person was able to like send the notice out immediately and follow up with the court right away to explain the problem, that they didn't receive the scheduling order in time, and it ultimately wasn't an issue at the hearing. I had another client recently who received the scheduling order on a Friday when the 10-day window was up that Monday. So over a weekend, had to hurry up and scramble to get those notices sent out to creditors. So you can find some issues here. The court has seemed to have some problems with consistency and communication. So just be aware that is something that might come up, but it's not always a fatal issue. Once you have mailed everything out, you will want to be providing proof of that notice a day or like 1 to 3 days before the hearing. And so to do that, as part of the application for name change, there's a form called an Affidavit of Service by mail. And it's a form that you get as part of the entire packet. And so you just fill that out and send it back to the court along with that USPS receipt with the tracking numbers. Additionally, since it's certified mail, you'll want to go to the USPS website to actually look up each individual tracking number, print out the results or turn it into a PDF, and then send that information to the court as well. If you happen to miss any supporting documents at the outset of the filing when you initially sent things to the court, this is also the time to kind of cure those issues and send in any missing documents. It is, though, going to be very important to confirm with the court that they actually did receive the documentation. And then a few days later, you're just going to attend your virtual hearing. Again, the client will have those instructions that they should receive with the scheduling order. But the hearing itself is pretty brief. It's not something that folks really should be terribly concerned about. I know for many folks, the idea of going and appearing in court, appearing before a judge, it is a scary kind of overwhelming experience. But again, from my own experiences and seeing from other folks, their hearings, it's very short, it's very easy. Judges usually just want to confirm the person's identity, ask, okay, what's your current name? What is the name you want to assume? Why do you want to have that name? Are you doing it for any fraudulent purpose? What is your reason for filing? And that's basically it. The hearing should be done within 5 minutes, if that. And again, in at least my own experiences, I have never seen judges be disrespectful or rude to our clients in DC. I've actually found that DC judges tend to be very affirming and very mindful of queer folks going through this process. And so it's really heartening to see that from the judiciary. But if At the hearing, there was any kind of issue with getting notice, like not receiving the scheduling order in time and not being able to send out notice in time. That's something that you can address at the hearing itself. And if the judge does have a problem with it, instead of dismissing the case, the person can also just ask the judge to continue the hearing and reschedule them. So that gives them a new 10-day clock to go and send out notice instead of having to start the entire process over again. The court is usually able to work with folks to figure something out.
Great. So yeah, after that hearing, the client should receive the name change court order. It may take up to 6 months for them to receive a decision. Yeah, and if the client filed a motion to seal with the case and it was denied for some reason, they can then refile a motion to seal after the name change case is finalized, as there is a different argument to be made for a case that is sealed after the fact. Yeah, and then once you have the name change court order, you're good to go on all of the other updates. So once you have the name change court order, that is the new legal name, that is the legal name, and the client can then use that to change their name on all of their documents. They can also start signing things using this new legal name. Different documents have very different standards for updating their gender markers, but the name change court order is all that is needed to actually update the name. Yeah, so for Social Security, they require a letter. In order to update the gender marker, they require a letter from a medical provider. And we have a template for that letter from a medical provider in our name change guide, which we have a link to in our other training. Yeah, and then for birth certificates, that usually also requires a form to update the gender marker. It very much depends on the state of the issuing state. For birth certificates, we usually recommend that people reach out to their vital records. They'll update their birth certificate with the state where they were born that issued the birth certificate. So that state's vital records office will have more information on updating the gender marker and all of the steps to actually update the name as well, as alongside providing the name change court order. Locally, licenses and IDs allow for self-attestation for gender marker in the DMV area, which means there's no medical certification required to update the gender marker on the ID. You can just self-attest either as they said through selecting something on a screen or submitting a form that the person fills out themselves. And in order to update the name, they just need to change the name with Social Security before they can update with the DMV, because they'll bring that updated Social Security card to the DMV with them to update the name on their ID. And then the next step is just to celebrate. After all of the steps and getting everything done, you'll have all of the updated identity documents and everything will be ready to go. And it's very exciting. And it's a great moment to celebrate all of the accomplishment of getting everything updated.
I love it. So the next stage of this is the question. You've got your golden ticket name change court order. You've updated your DC driver's license or ID with your name. You self-attested to your gender. You've already updated Social Security. You could go get a passport. What else do you think people then have to update after they've changed their name and gender marker? The one thing we did talk about, right? Social Security record, that's one. And are the bullets available?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, it all comes together. Okay, got it. So just to think through this, but it's actually every account and record. So this is the final stage, the last part of the update process. This includes, as we mentioned, birth certificate, Social Security, passport, immigration documents, school records, updating your insurance company, updating your banks, your loan servicers, your utilities, your lease, everywhere, any account, any record that has your name, you can then take that updated driver's license with your name and gender marker and use that, because that is now your official documentation. use that to tell your bank, can you please update my name in the system? You would take that to your doctor's office as well. You would, and your insurance company, and you send a copy to these organizations so they can update your records. And that information is how your credit report ends up getting updated, because your credit report actually relies on the information from the people you do business with. So when you update your record with your bank, the bank then transmit that that account is owned by this new name, right? So it ends up being a lot of things, and it takes a bit of time. So it is this entire process, as you can see, from filing to waiting for the hearing and completing the hearing and all the steps in between, to updating the identity documents themselves, and then to all of your records. So it is quite a process. It does take time. It's really important to stay organized. But once you get that ID, that driver's license that's updated, that's all you need for the most part, I would say, to update all the rest of your records. All right, we can go to the next one. So resources for you and your clients. As we've talked about, our incredibly handy guide from our many years of this work and hearing client feedback. We have DC name and gender change guides in English and Spanish. We have links here to our website where these can be found online. We also have them for Maryland and Virginia, also in English and Spanish. These will walk you step by step through the application, like question by question. And just like we had it outlined today, you'll have the slides, but these you can print out and give to clients as well for reference. But it literally walks you through step by step. And like we did in this training, it walks you through then the gender marker. We have template letter for Social Security for a doctor to sign, for gender marker update, and more questions and concerns about birth certificates, reporting to selective service, and all the rest of the updates. And our contact information is also in these guides. So very handy. I still use it when I'm advising people because it's just got so much detail. And we even have county by county information for Maryland and Virginia. So it's just an incredibly helpful resource. There's also the DC courts page on name changes. And so you'll have the application there, the newest version. You'll also have fee waiver forms and everything that you'll need for filing. You'll also find the minors application there. It's all available, the newest version on the court's website. And finally, we include the National Center for Transgender Equality, or NCTE, their ID document center. And so through the link that we have provided here, you have information on every state ID document process. And so if you say you are working with a client who says, I actually have a birth certificate from North Carolina, how do I change it? You could go to this website and it will tell you all the information they have on how to change all of your identity documents in that state. So it's an incredibly helpful resource for helping folks who may have birth certificates or in other jurisdictions outside of the DMV.
Right. And now we would like to wrap up with, before getting into a Q&A, which is kind of going through a bit of a hypothetical, and definitely would love to get some chat participation on this situation about Clara, a 24-year-old trans woman who is coming to us for help with a name change. And so we thought we'd start off with just the overall question of how can she actually go about filing her application? Then while folks are thinking, Elena is asking if both parents of a minor has to be listed on a name change form or just one. You do have to list both parents. Preferably both parents will need to sign to consent to the form. If only one parent is signing and the other person is not consenting or is not signing, that second parent will need to be served with a copy of the petition so that they are notified that this is happening and can weigh in. But folks want to type in the chat about how Clara can get started with the name change process. Well, definitely don't be shy. But to recap what's from what we were saying earlier, yep, you can file the application online via Case File Express or mail it in. Do folks know what division she will be filing her name change with as a 24-year-old? For a lot of places, yeah, people do go with circuit courts, but in DC, we are a little special and we only have our one DC Superior Court. And so instead of a separate court, it's different places within the court. For most adults, anyone 21 or older, they're filing with DC Judge and Chambers. But for anyone under that, they're going to be filing with the Family Division. Let's see. But once you are sitting down and talking with Clara to kind of advise her through the process and help her with the name change forms, what are some of the questions that you think we should be asking her about? All right, so some of the things that we have been talking about today, yep, whether she has creditors or legal problems, that is spot on. What do other folks think? Sex offender is another really important question to ask folks because they will have to notify folks if they are on the registry. Same thing for gun registries. Whether or not she needs language assistance. Let's see. And those are all some great questions and pretty much what we want to be talking through with our clients. Who are her creditors? And that includes things like utilities, loan servicers, or credit cards. Even if there's a $0 balance. And yes, Kimberly, I like that. Is this your lifelong desire? It is a big moment for folks when they are thinking about whether to change their name. But like I said, I've done it twice. So that tells you that if you change your name the first time and decide it doesn't fit, you can always change your name a second time. So people don't need to be worried about getting locked into one name for the rest of their life. Let's see. Some of the other questions that we like to be asking folks about is whether or not they're involved in any ongoing criminal or civil proceedings in case they need to be notifying folks. If people have misdemeanor convictions, they don't need to notify people. But if they have felony convictions, they need to notify appropriate law enforcement agencies, even if the case is actually closed. So that's always something to be pretty mindful of. Other questions that we think are important to ask folks is checking in whether or not they've ever had a name change before, whether or not the person is a United States citizen, since that does include some of those special considerations that we talked about previously. And another important one is, of course, whether or not she needs a fee waiver or any other kind of financial assistance, since both fee waivers are available. And for trans or non-binary folks, gender non-conforming folks, they are also welcome to reach out to us and we can help coordinate with them to get them funding to make sure that cost is never a barrier to folks. See, other questions that we want to be talking about is what kind of documents that she would need to actually file. So what do folks think about that? What are the things that Clara is going to need to submit to the court with her petition? All right, we got identity documents, lease, birth certificate. Those are all great things to include. And birth certificate is definitely going to be one of the first ones. And a certified translation is important if it's not already in English. Let's see. Rosina said a lease, and that is definitely a really important thing to include. Some kind of proof of residency. But remember that there are a whole lot of different kinds of proofs of residency that people can actually use. To just kind of hurry up and go through this to get to questioning, to make sure that there is time for some Q&A. Folks are also going to need to be including a photo ID. If they are filing for a fee waiver, you'll want to include receipt of some kind of a means tested benefit for fee waiver folks. And then the other questions that we want to be thinking about when talking through this process is whether folks really should be following up with an attorney about name change issues before filing. And a couple of times where we think that that's important is if where folks are doing e-filing, since that can be a bit more of a cumbersome process. Motions to seal are another thing where it could be beneficial to have some assistance, since motions are not a standard form, and it's something that is the court doesn't have a template motion to seal, so it's not something that they have just offhand. The risk assessment for non-citizens, though, is another important one, even for lawful permanent residents, aka folks who have green cards. So here is more some other locations where you can where you can go to find more about our services. We have some contact information for other folks in Whitman-Walker that might be helpful. For folks who have legal or need legal assistance generally, they can reach out to Leonor Suarez, our bilingual legal intake coordinator. We also have a public benefits helpline for folks to talk to people about their eligibility for benefits and get help with applying for things or recertifying if they need to. We also have a lot of peer support services available and trans care or medical health care navigation. And of course, we have just our general number at the bottom if folks want to register as a patient or ask about any other services. And so, and this information will all be available we'll share the slides, so you'll have this information later. If you have any questions or comments about the material and need more information, there are many different places that you can go to ask for assistance from the court or from Whitman-Walker. But with that, we would love to open it up for some questions for a bit.
Also really quick, I'm just going to drop the evaluation survey in the chat. If people can fill that up, that would be great.
All right, so Kimberly is asking if a client needs to send out more than one certified notice in cases such as a Capital One credit card account if there's more than one account. You only need to send one notice to each individual creditor. So if you have, like I have both a debit account and a checking account or a credit account with PNC, like you don't need to include debit accounts when you're notifying folks, but like just because I have two different accounts with PNC, I only need to notify them once. So another example, like with loan servicers that are servicing a whole bunch of loans for one person, you only need to send them one notice. Do folks have any other questions about the material or the name change process?
I received a direct message and it says, does Whitman-Walker assist with persons under 21?
Yes, we do help minors with name changes. And so they should definitely reach out to us to get started and get on the wait list. All right, then I will go ahead and stop with the screen share. But it seems like that is about it. And it was very lovely getting to meet with all of you again and go through all of this. I always love to collaborate with other organizations in the region. Is there any CME credit for the seminar? No, unfortunately, we do not have this set up for that.
Hey, I also just want to say thank you all. It was a very informative presentation. I think everyone really learned a lot through this.
Certainly. And if you have any questions or issues in the future, definitely do feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you so much. And we will be sending the slides and completion certificates by the end of after the end of the presentation. Thank you.